Hello, everybody. Good morning. Thank you, Daniel and Daniel, for inviting me to be here. So, Hurtado de Mendoza's reflections on war are contained in his Disputations on the Three Theological Virtues, published in 1631. This attracted some attention, his thoughts on war, for the reason that they contain harsh criticism of the French, because the French were helping Dutch rebels against Spain. And so the general of the Jesuit order, Muzio Vitelleschi, had to ask, the French Jesuits asked Vitelleschi to recall this work and to have it corrected. But I will not be speaking about that aspect of Hurtado on war, but rather what he had to say about the Moriscos, which I think is quite interesting and original. So who were the Moriscos? The Moriscos were the population of Muslim descent, concentrating in the south of Spain and Valencia, but also in other places of Spain. The Moriscos were eventually expelled, as you know, from Spain in this was decided in 1609. But before 1609, before the expulsion of the Moriscos, there was a rebellion between 1568 and 1571 in Granada that was suppressed with a lot of force and a lot of blood spill. And so it's interesting to know what was the thinking of the late scholastics about what the Spanish forces had the right to do after the suppression of the Morisco rebellion, after victory. So just to put it within a more theoretical framework, these thoughts of Hurtado belong to what is now called the jus post bellum, which is a very hot topic now among just war theorists, not historians, but people who do contemporary just war theory. Because there is this traditional division between the jus in bello and the jus ad bello, the right to go to war and the right to on what you can do while you're fighting, but now there's a lot of interest in the day after question. What can you do after the war, right? So the jus post bellum deals with questions about the rights and duties of the victor, assuming it to be a just victor. Do I have a right to change the government? Do I have a right to occupy the enemy state, and for how long? And what are my duties? And do I have a right to punish those who have unjustly attacked me? These are some of the questions that come up today, for instance, in the aftermath of the war in Afghanistan or in Iraq. The late scholastics had quite a lot to say on these post-victory questions, the justice of the aftermath of victory. When I say victory, we have to understand that victory, from the point of view of Schwartz, Molina, and other late scholastics, it's not a moral event, it's a physical event. What victory is the end of resistance. I go out to war to achieve certain goals, and the enemy obstructs my obtention of those goals. So victory is simply the physical fact of the end of resistance. What victory makes is to make feasible, easier for me to achieve the goals that I wanted to achieve through war. What are the goals of just war? There is more or less agreement between the main late scholastic authors that these include the recuperation, taking back what has been seized from me. This may be property, this may be land. Defraying the costs of the war. You are attacking me unjustly. I'm fighting now. I want back the money that I have spent, the resources that I have spent having to defend myself. There is an issue of satisfaction and punishment. I want some sort of moral satisfaction. I want to inflict harm on the enemy as a way of retributivist understanding of punitive justice. And finally, there is the issue of future security. I am going out to war also to create circumstances in which no further attacks are possible. And I will say a little bit more about security later on, because it's important for the issue of the Moriscos. Let's write Moriscos here. Moriscos. Okay. So, by which means can I achieve these various goals of just war? Basically, there are three main means. One is killing. The second one is despoiling the enemy, taking the property. And the third one is enslaving the enemy. So I have these three means by which I can secure punishment, I can secure recuperation of what has been taken from me, and I can also perhaps secure future peace. So I will be focusing on not on whether you can kill, despoil, or enslave the culpable enemy. That goes without saying. I mean, most late scholastics have no problem saying that combatants, assuming combatants, enemy combatants fighting on the just side, providing they are culpable, you can kill them, you can take the property, you can enslave them if they are not Christians. But the question here is not about all the Moriscos, but about the innocent Moriscos. The innocent Moriscos, namely children, women, Moriscos deprived of free will, mentally impaired, and Moriscos who took no part in combat. And so the question is, can you kill them? Can you despoil them? Can you enslave them? So a few words about security as a goal of war. Vittoria thought that future security gives you a lot of permissions as to the harm that you can do to the enemy. And he says, a prince may do anything necessary in a just war to ensure peace and security from attack. Anything necessary. So security, future security as a goal of war gives you a lot of margin for action. And Vittoria, Suarez, Molina, they all agreed that if to ensure future security you need to kill all of the enemy combatants, now I'm going back to culpable, no, I'm not talking about the innocents, you may do that. It's very rare that this will happen. There are many prudential considerations against doing it. But if the only way of eliminating the possibility of a future unjust attack is to kill all of those who have fought you, you can kill them. The way Lorca, and I will be referring to Pedro de Lorca later on, because he's important. Pedro de Lorca, who was a Cistercian, and who was important for Hurtado de Mendoza, the way Lorca says it is security is not a sufficient reason to kill somebody. You cannot kill, and this all of the late scholastics agreed, you cannot kill a Morisco innocent child, 8 years old, because you think that in the future he will grow up, he will remember what happened, and he will join a new rebellion. That's not enough. So security does not give you a right to kill, a sufficient reason to kill a person, but it gives you a sufficient reason, says Lorca, not to remit the punishment, not to pardon. So basically, all the enemy culpable combatants, they deserve death. I can kill them. There is no injustice in killing them, but I can decide not to kill them. Okay? So security only gives me a reason not to pardon them. So I say, okay, I could kill you, I could pardon you, but I fear that you may in the future attack me again. So security concerns give me a reason not to pardon you. So the way Lorca puts it is security is not a sufficient cause to inflict death, but it is sufficient to not remit the death penalty. Right, so moving on to innocence and putting now security aside, can we despoil the innocence of the enemy country? So here we don't find that much disagreement. Most late scholastic authors says, yes, you can, and there are different justifications. And this was discussed mostly under the heading of reprisals. Reprisals is when you take a merchant ship, say a Dutch merchant ship, and you take some property from the people in the ship to to get satisfaction or to get a sort of reimbursement for damage done by other citizens. So you take the property of citizen A for a damage done to you by citizen B. And A is innocent. So how can you justify doing that? And here, Molina has a sort of organicist understanding of what's going on. So Luis de Molina says, the whole state is considered an enemy. The whole state is an enemy, and therefore it is permissible to punish it in any of its members insofar as they are its parts with respect to external goods and the goods of fortune. So I'm fighting against the state. The state is made of members. Every member of the enemy state is a conduit, is a vehicle for punishment. So I can punish Daniel, and through punishing Daniel, I'm punishing the Czech Republic, and I'm punishing the Czech Republic because something that, do we have any more Czechs around? The other Daniel did to me, right? But actually, the Molina explanation is not, it looks at the beginning a bit organicist, but in the end, the thought is that the Czech Republic is liable for damage done to me by Daniel Novotny. The Czech Republic failed to do, was negligent in compensating for damage done by Daniel Novotny. Therefore, now the Czech Republic is liable, and so I can do something against Daniel Haider, but then you can sue the Czech Republic for damage I've done to you because the Czech Republic is liable. It's now responsible to you for, you don't have a claim against me, but you have a claim against the Czech Republic for the reprisal that I've done to you. The Francisco Suarez explanation of the legitimacy and the rightness of reprisals is it's a bit different. It's centered on the idea of eminent domain, that the state has a superior right over the property of the citizens. So that, in fact, our property is a form of protected custody. So if I have a house, the house is given to me under certain conditions, and the state is allowed to confiscate it if the state needs to build a road that goes through the location of the house. So, in essence, because property is a form of protected custody, by seizing my property, you are damaging my state because the ultimate owner of my property is the state. I just have a protected custody. And therefore, by taking property of Dutch innocents, I am actually, it's a way of punishing the Dutch, taking property from the Dutch state, which has superior or eminent domain over that property. So this analysis of property is important. Why? Because liberty was conceived as a form of property, my liberty. So the same analysis that you conduct on property, you can use the same analysis for enslavement, because enslavement is just seizing or taking or confiscating the property of citizens, right? So, that's why we cannot really treat the question of enslavement of innocents separately from the question of despoiling innocents. If you can despoil innocents, it seems you can also enslave them, because it's just taking a different kind of property, which is still property, which is their liberty. How does the question of enslavement of the innocents comes about? The king, the Spanish kings, after this rebellion of the Moriscos, decides that children under the age of 9.5 and girls under the age of 10.5, or the other way around, 10.5 and 9.5, are exempted from slavery. They cannot be enslaved. This was actually the case. So these children, the adults were sold in auction, actually, but the children were given to families to raise them until the age of 18. And Molina asks, is the king here asserting a natural right of these innocents, or is the king condoning pardoning them, giving them some extra privilege that is not due to them under natural law. And Molina's answer is that in principle, these Morisco children could be enslaved. So the king is only giving them a sort of condoning a privilege. Okay. So what was the problem with the Moriscos? The problem with the Moriscos is that the traditional theory of war slavery held that, first of all, there is an agreement between Christian nations that you cannot enslave the baptized enemy. So this was not a matter of natural law, but a matter of either the law of peoples or something that was outside the law of peoples, but still an agreement between Christian nations. And second of all, the theories I described it said you can enslave subjects of a different country. But the Moriscos, first of all, were baptized. And number two, they were Spanish subjects. So theoretically, there was a hurdle there in trying to justify, as Molina and Schwartz and all the rest did, their enslavement. How to solve this? Well, the sincerity of the baptism could be put in doubt. The sincerity of their faith. This was the same arguments that were used to expulse in the expulsion of the Moriscos later on. And as to their being subjects of the king, so you cannot treat them as conduits for the punishment of a different state, the solution was to say that, as Molina said, that when the Moriscos rebelled, they created their own state within Spain, and they had a leader. This was Hernando del Valor, who changed his name to Ibn Umayya. There are different versions. And so, in doing that, they ceased being subjects of the Spanish kingdom, and they became like a state on their own. So that allowed to Molina to deploy his theory of enslavement, of war enslavement, and apply it to the Moriscos as well. So there are only two persons I have found that objected the view that you can enslave the Morisco innocents. One is Pedro de Lorca, and the other is Hurtado de Mendoza. Pedro de Lorca, I would say some things about Pedro de Lorca objection, which is a qualified objection, and then I will tell you about Hurtado de Mendoza. So de Lorca starts by trying to refute sort of the organicist understanding that says that the state is like a body, and therefore, just as I can punish Mauro by hitting him in any part of his body, I can punish a state by hitting him in any part of the state, which are the citizens. So the way Lorca puts it is, a republic, this is Lorca, a republic cannot be punished in its innocent members, nor a son for his father, nor in general one person for another. Nor does the moral conjunction that unites the parts of the republic suffice to that effect, nor is the republic like a natural body in which parts are constituted as a unity per se, informed by one soul and ruled by one will. So the liability of guilt redounds in all of the person and its parts. The moral unity of the republic is accidental. Just it does not eliminate the fact that one remains master of one's own acts. It does not suffice to make the culpa of one person, the guilt of one person or the blame, redound in another person without his consent, so that one cannot justify inflicting a punishment on one person in place of another. So it's very clear, you cannot pull the responsibilities of all of the citizens for their actions in one big unit of responsibility and therefore punish one person for another. But Lorca, as I said, finds some place for enslaving the innocent. And this comes as a sort of reflection or an interpretation of a biblical passage. A biblical passage that in itself is very confusing because the translations look, all of them, very different. But so there's a passage in Deuteronomy 20:19, and it says this: "When you have besieged a city for a long time and had compassed it with bulwarks to take it, you shall not cut down the trees that may be eaten off, Neither shall you spoil the country round about with axes, for it is a tree, and not a man. Neither can it increase the number of them that fight against thee. So the way Lorca reads this passage is that it's a tree, not a man. And so the tree cannot increase the numbers of those defending the city under siege. And that's the reason why you cannot cut down the tree. So this passage seems to imply that if it was a man that could increase the number of those upholding defending the city, then you could cut that man down, or you could kill him. So thinking about this passage, Lorca says that if some innocent Moriscos were thought that if it was the thought that if I don't enslave them, if I don't take their liberty, they will eventually join the combatants, and this will have the effect of making the war longer and increasing the harm for both sides, then I can enslave them. So this is the only possibility that Lorca sees for, after all, allowing that it may be sometimes permissible to enslave the Morisco innocents. The reason is that if these women and children join the combatant body, it would make them liable to be killed, thus their fate can be commuted to that of slavery. Now we reach Hurtado de Mendoza. So Hurtado de Mendoza is adamant that he doesn't see any possible reason that might justify enslaving these innocent Moriscos. And he takes the trouble to go through each and one of the arguments of defenders of this enslavement. I will tell you a little bit about the argument. The first argument is very much like Lorca, denying that the state can be treated as a body. It's a body only in a metaphorical way, not in a real way. You are a body in a real way when you have one will, one unified will, and there is not one unified will in the state. The second argument, hang on, I lost track here. Something wrong. Okay. It's all good. The second argument is to say that he agrees with the claim made by others, and he has in mind Gilles de Koning, that in extreme circumstances, just as the state can confiscate your property, for instance, if I need your car in a war situation, I can take your car. In extreme circumstances, I can take your liberty if the survival of the state depends on that. And Hurtado does not deny that. And the example that Gilles de Koning gives, which is quite interesting, because you might think, so whenever is it necessary for a state to survive to allow one of its citizens to be enslaved? And Koning gives an example, and this is the example of peace treaties. Peace treaties at the time often included a clause by which there was an exchange of hostages, or there was a giving of hostages. And this was a guarantee that you would respect the peace treaty. So if I make a peace treaty with Eric, I say, okay, you take 10 of my citizens. If I break the peace treaty, feel free to kill them. And so in me giving you my citizens, and they will be held in captivity in your country. It's more or less like depriving them of their liberty for the sake of the common good of my country. So Gilles de Koning says if that is allowed, then that can explain why we can also enslave innocents in war. How does the argument work? Well, if the defeated state has a right in extreme circumstance to reduce some of its citizens to slavery, and now I defeat that state, that right is transferred to me. So the victor acquires the right of the defeated state, and the defeated state has the right in some circumstances to enslave some of its citizens. So that's how in war you can explain why you can enslave innocents. And Hurtado de Mendoza, and I can expand on this later, says that that is fine, but the extreme circumstances are not in place. He cannot think of any extreme circumstances right now that make it necessary for the survival of Spain that, that the Morisco innocents be enslaved. Let me tell you a little bit more about the other reasons for enslavement that Hurtado rejects. There is the legal issue. There was a body of law in the Jus Gentium and also ecclesiastical laws that could be interpreted as enabling or enjoining the enslavement of innocents. Well, he says these laws only apply to the culpable, not to the innocent. Then there is also the issue of security, which I mentioned, which is actually the only reason that Lorca allows for enslaving the Moriscos. And what Mendoza has to say about this is that it just doesn't apply. Let me just read out the paraphrases. It is clear, he says, that the security of Christians in Spain can be preserved without depriving the Turks, he uses the term Turks here, of their liberty. Their liberty is compatible with the introduction of severe laws preventing the Turks from fleeing or building an army. Therefore, the Republic can be preserved merely by forcing the Turks to remain in the country, limiting their access to arms and to other military resources. They cannot be sold. They should retain their rights and to acquire property and enter into contracts, and they should retain their liberty. So if the issue is security, you can keep under the Moriscos under a tight control without selling them into slavery. Slavery is just too much. You just don't need that. And he does use the word Turks. I have a few paragraphs on whether he means Turks or Moriscos. I think he means Moriscos because there were very, very few Turkish Ottoman slaves in Spain to even make it relevant, the question about whether we can enslave the Turks. There were just a few hundred of them. So, and the last reason, and you know, here things get a bit ambiguous, is the last reason that Hurtado de Mendoza wants to reject is that, well, this is the custom now. People are trading in Morisco children. These are being enslaved, or not children, I should say women, because as I mentioned, the children were exempted. So the innocent Moriscos that were auctioned then were only non-combatant women and men. And the answer here of Hurtado de Mendoza, this is, as a matter of truth, this is wrong, this is illicit. But it is illicit accidentally out of probable opinion, that's the expression. And then you can interpret that as saying, well, if there is sufficient extrinsic probable opinion, if sufficient experts like Molina, Schwartz, and others say it's okay, then as a confessor, you may be allowed to not impute a sin to someone who has a Morisco slave because it's, look, I think it's wrong, but all these other experts think this is fine. Now, this is as far as Mendoza goes in being sort of understanding towards the practice. And in the very few texts after Mendoza that mention his view, they say, well, he was speculatively against it, the enslavement of the Morisco, but practically okay with it. But I'm not sure that that's the way of reading that particular argument or thought of Hurtado de Mendoza. So as I said, how much time do I have?
2 minutes.
Okay.
Okay,
so he goes through all the arguments, all the justifications for Morisco's innocent slavery, and then there is a question I will not have the time to discuss with you of inconsistency, because Hurtado de Mendoza does think you can despoil innocent enemies. He doesn't think you can enslave them. But if liberty is just one other type of property, then why treat liberty differently than regular property? And he has a little discussion about that and about the nature of the law of people, the jus gentium, and why liberty has to be treated differently than property. He doesn't think the liberty is not property. So he doesn't question the premise of including liberty in the goods of fortune, as they were called. But he does say that for practical reasons, we have established that all the property, of the innocent civilians, enemy civilians, goes to the victor, and that makes sense. That reduces harm, that reduces bloodshed, but the same reasons don't apply to liberty. You don't get the same results of reducing harm by transferring the liberty of the vanquished. And so I'm happy to expand on that later if there is time, question time. So finally, why is this, I think, historically, if not philosophically, important? Historians of the Morisco rebellion of 1568, this is called the Alpujarras rebellion, or the second Alpujarras rebellion, have thought this way. For instance, take Aurelia Martín Casares. She's a very good historian of the period, and she says, there is no Vitoria or Bartolomé de las Casas to defend the Morisco population of the kingdom of Granada. The status of the defeated Moriscos was perhaps lower than that of the Indians in the thinking of that period. They did not inspire the least feeling of humanity. Nobody opposed their slavery. So this is the agreed view among Spanish historians and also non-Spanish historians. Nobody stood up for the Moriscos after the rebellion. So one thing we see is that, two things about this. First of all, this expectation that just as Bartolomé de las Casas and Vitoria, you can argue Vitoria yes or no, but at least consider seriously arguments in defense of the American natives, the situations are entirely different. You shouldn't have the same expectations about the Moriscos and the Native Americans. The Native Americans were not rebels against the Spanish king. They don't rise in arms. So the very expectation that, oh, why do we have a Bartolomé de las Casas in the case of the Indians but not of the Moriscos is a misplaced expectation. I'm talking only here about the rebellion because there were advocates of the Moriscos against the expulsion of them. But the second thing is also to consider that you do have objectors, as we saw Lorca and Mendoza, and the good, I don't know if it's a good thing, but it speaks well of them that they were going against the theological current. I mean, if you think of Bartolomé de las Casas and Vitoria, in their criticism to the way Spain was treating the Native Americans, they were acting with a very supportive intellectual milieu. I mean, most theologians in Salamanca and elsewhere were with them, not the humanists, but their colleagues. Whereas in the case of Mendoza and Lorca, they are going against Schwartz, against Vitoria, against Molina, against everybody around. They are very kind of solitary voices. So that gives them a sort of extra value or extra merit, I would say, to their admittedly somewhat qualified but yet genuine opposition. And that's why I think it's nice to talk about this. Thank you.